I have no idea what I did before I had 2 monitors on my phone.
Okay, and welcome back. Next topic that we're going to go into is critical race theory, which of course is the theory on who wins the race. It's very critical to know. So no, actually we're going to talk about racism and sort of how a little bit more in the nitty gritty, since we've already kind of defined our terms a little bit, and I hope giving you some things to think about there. So Paul, go through, you said there's some tenets on our break. If you'll break those down and then we'll just talk about those.
Okay. So a lot of this I get from David French, who's an attorney. He actually took a couple of critical race theory courses in law school. So I'm going to say something that's generally not popular. Critical race theory is taught in the upper levels of law school. It is not taught in your K through 12 government school. There might be pieces here and there taught, but critical race theory is taught in academia. The whole theory itself couldn't be. You can't take a kindergartner and walk them through the finer points of American jurisprudence. It doesn't work. But the common components that David French has found are that in critical race theory, racism is ingrained into the fabric of American society. And the next one is a rejection of what he calls small L liberalism. That's not liberalism as we think of it in our right-left context. This is think modern libertarianism or something along those lines. But it's rejection of things like free speech as an independent value. If your speech isn't falling in line, then we've got to get rid of that. And then the third one is the rejection of meritocracy. So if somebody has earned a place, then somehow their ethnicity has come into play as to why they've earned their place, as opposed to they've earned their place on their own merits. And I'm going to I'll use the term race when I say critical race theory, because that's the technical name of the theory. But other than that, the term ethnicity is a far better term. So that I'll leave that as the answer to that question.
Sure.
And go on.
Yeah. So before I bring Matt in on this, because I'll pitch it around, but I wanted to address a couple things on that. First of all, you said that it's not being taught in schools, right? In K through 12 schools.
Right.
I think that while it's like, yeah, okay, so you're not, let's use like a complicated piece of machinery that is used for like a crane, right? The concept of a crane is, to move like big, heavy things, whatever, is done by a very skilled professional, right? In a construction thing, you have to have a crane's license, right? Whatever. So, but the concept and the world view, whatever, of a crane, like the concept of like pulleys and leverage, whatever, that you use in a crane, right, might be something that you use in your everyday life, right? So you might use because we understand this as a concept, as a crane, the pulley systems and how that works, okay? And so you go into so if I see the world as a series of how
need to be moved
of being impressed, oppressed. If I see the world as a series of structures that have kept a certain segment of our population, down, so to speak, or oppressed, then I'm going to, and I believe that I'm going to see that everywhere I look, right? So when I'm teaching kids, when I'm a teacher, and this is my worldview, this is my understanding, when I know about cranes or whatever, I'm going to teach that concept to the kids. Now I'm not going to speak it. I'm not going to explain it in terms of the complicated inner workings of how a crane works, but I'm going to explain it in a way that's not was dumbed down to the level of the people that I'm talking to. So how that plays out, I think, in these schools and what people are upset about is that you are, taking the concept that the United States has all these structural and systemic racist, past. And then so I'm teaching kids about, okay, so you might have some white privilege. The fact that you're white, gives you an edge or an advantage. Now, one thing that I will say is an interesting antidote. When I was in the military, I had a friend of mine who asked me to ask the teacher something, and he had a position, a rank above me. And I said, why don't you ask him? You outrank me. It'd be better if it was coming from you. And he said, no, you ask it because you're white. He's a Filipino guy. And I was like, because I'm white. And I was like, I don't even understand what you're saying. And a group of the guys that were all Filipino and I was hanging out with, it just happened to be a whole row of us, standing there. And they were all like, yeah, no, you got to ask him, because the teacher was white. And he was like, oh, he'll let. And the question was, can we go to lunch early? And he was like, well, if I say it, it's not going to come off right. But if you say it, it's going to be perceived as innocent. And hey, we're not doing anything. Can we just go to lunch early? And it blew my mind. And it made me think wait, do I have some sort of weird white privilege right now? This is so strange. And I've seen plenty of times, with, being in an interracial marriage, there's been plenty of situations where things get boiled down to race. And it's not even on my, just right over my head. And I'm like, okay, I could see where you perceive that. But the thing is, I don't know that it's necessarily all of it's real, but I do think some of it, and maybe most of it, is real. There are perceptions that we have about certain people, certain races, certain things that just come with our experiences, And so I don't think you can take everything that I don't think you can blame everything on CRT for how our kids are being educated and issues of race in our school. And I don't blame that all on CRT. Right. But I do think that CRT has some role in how it talks about it. And I think it's had a very poor rollout. I don't know. I mean, and it's been framed by politicians rather than the people that are practicing, the practitioners. So I threw all that out there. So Matt, why don't you go ahead and react to those tenets, those 3 tenets.
So where to begin?
I know, sorry.
Yeah. So, there's so much to say.
You mean to restate them one at a time and let you respond to each one?
Let's do that.
Okay. So, and again, these are common elements. They're not necessarily in every single person's definition, but they're common enough to include. So the first one is racism is ingrained into the fabric of American society.
Racism many times is more of an issue of in-group, out-group. So actually that was what I was wanting to say. So you were talking about the Filipino, but there's also many times where a girl will have a guy say something, or a guy will have a girl say something because they don't have to worry about their intentions being misunderstood. And that happens very commonly. It's called in-group, out-group. As long as there is a us and a them, there's a potential for misunderstanding. So that is just a fact of life. I don't think we're going to be able to get around, but it's also sometimes does lead to what you were talking about. When you have an in-group, out-group dynamic and you start associating subconsciously this one group with talking this particular way or always being offensive in this particular instance, then that is what you expect of that group. And so groups become stereotyped in people's minds, but they also vary from person to person. Really, the only way to diffuse in-group, out-group problems is by empathy. Why does it keep coming to that? Feeling for the other person. So that is the one thing that I would point out, is that with the first thing, that racism is not going to be solved by any application of any particular theory. Now, the other thing, what was the second point? Because I think there was something I wanted to say on that.
Okay, the second one was the idea of the rejection of small L liberalism or classical liberalism,
Yeah.
which is not the same as modern liberalism.
Yeah.
If think modern libertarianism for small L liberalism, but the idea of freedom of speech, freedom of movement, natural rights, critical, well, you can trace critical race theory back to Marx, and I'll do that later. But
yeah, and I was about
Marx
to say,
rejected all those things.
Where there's a whenever anything goes wrong, it's usually because there is something wrong for it to react to. I'd say that in this case, there's very little that it's reacting to that is absolutely wrong, but the fundamentals of freedom of speech, of absolutes, have been challenged to the point where critical race theory is poised for a takedown of those two things, because absolutes are necessary in order to say that anything is valued, that one thing is better than another, and critical race theory attacks that. So I would say, if anything, that's really where the payload of poison is, more so than even the first one, because the idea that racism is something that needs to be systematically dealt with, that's true. There has to be, like, I'm not going to say that I think saying that every meritocracy is evil.
Right, so meritocracy was the third point.
Okay, yeah, I guess we'll go to that then. So in order to say that a meritocracy is evil, and judging people by their merits is something that is inherently wrong, is also an absolute statement. But it's not very consistent. I don't think CRT is very consistent, really, but it's applied. It is trying to attack a valid problem of systematic race or racism, or ethnocentrism, perhaps, would be the better term there. So, go ahead.
Yeah. All right. So I think this is good. I think we're building definitely some momentum here. I think we've talked about some good things. This is going to take us out of the second segment, and we will be right back for your third and final thoughts. And that is going to be on Marxism, classism. We'll get into that good stuff. And then we're going to end with the question, is CRT good or bad? We're going to get everybody's take on that. So if you will join us in a few minutes, we'll be right back.